in terms of kind of Western science and Western medicine, how this particular philosophy comes into play is that there was this idea that our bodies were kind of like machines. Like, I'm going to use the analogy of a clock because that's the one that's often used in talking about it. So if you think about a clock, you could take that clock apart and you can look at all the little parts of the clock. You can, see the different hands that move. You can see all the mechanisms, right? If you deconstruct a clock. And in the case of a clock, if something's broken in a clock, well, you can get a new part. Say the second hand isn't working properly, so you get a new second hand. Or say something in the timing mechanism isn't working right, you just get one of those and replace it. So there was this idea really that is basically the way the human body could be understood as well. And if you think of the early days of, starting to dissect bodies and things like that, that's kind of what they were trying to do, was understand us from this perspective of the parts that make us up. And, that can definitely be helpful to understand what each part does, what our different organs do, what our component parts do. But the problem is when we stick to this philosophy of us being like clocks, we're really not. It's not so simple to get a replacement part, even though we can do things like transplants for livers and hearts and different organs, it's still not so simple as in the case of something that doesn't have a living essence to it as a clock. But this old paradigm of kind of understanding us in this mechanistic viewpoint still informs how Western medicine wants to treat us. And so basically the idea of doing surgery, you can see how that very much relates to kind of this paradigm. That's one of the main kind of tools in Western medicine's arsenal, is doing surgery when appropriate. Sometimes that's a great fix for certain things, and surgery certainly is not something that I say doesn't have any value, but it's not always a solution for a lot of different things. And there's also complications in healing. And then, as many of you know, with Western medicine, really the approach is to take medications as kind of another way of trying to correct imbalances. And again, I think I've said this in previous episodes, I'm not anti-medication. Medications certainly can be life-saving and important for things, but the problem is in many cases that they don't really resolve the root issue. They're kind of more like managing symptoms. And sometimes that's necessary, and sometimes it keeps people alive who wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. So I'm not completely knocking it. But if those are basically the only two ways that we're approaching things, is by, surgery when it's appropriate and needed, and taking medications, we're never really going to heal the root of the problem. And if we don't heal the root of the problem, think of it as like a diseased tree, and the problem is at the roots. How is the rest of the tree going to keep growing in a healthy fashion if we don't deal with the issue at the roots?